Hello and welcome back to Photo Espresso, your webcast for all things photography. Today we talk to Michael Reichman about his latest tutorial on the luminous landscape titled From Camera to Print and Screen. And all that and more is coming up next in episode number 20 of Photo Espresso on SMIBS TV.
SMIBS TV. Webcasts for people with a passion. Live connectivity for Photo Espresso is provided by ThinkTel. Switch without interruption to a cost-effective IP-based telephone service at thinktel.net. Hosting for Photo Espresso is brought to you by Webcore Labs. Host your own website at webcorelabs.com.
This is Photo Espresso, episode number 20 for September 8th, 2011. From Camera to Print and Screen with Michael Reichman. Hello and welcome back to episode number 20 of Photo Espresso here at SMIBS TV. We're happy to have episode number 20 of this second show of ours covering all things photography on an almost weekly basis. We've been a little bit slower through the summer, taking a bit of a rest, but we are happy to welcome back our good friend from the luminous landscape, Michael Reichman. Michael, how are you doing today?
I am doing very well. Great to see you again.
Yeah, you look very good. I take it, I understand from our talk before that you just been on a great trip with Phase 1, doing a workshop, teaching people how to maximize the potential of their latest equipment, right?
Yeah, Phase 1 has a very clever program in place called POTUS, Phase 1 Digital Artist Series. And what they do is they hold workshops all over the world, and people come and they pay. They're not free, and they actually pay quite a bit. But they get to use, about $1 million worth of Phase 1 backs and cameras and lenses. They have instructors. I was one of 4 instructors on this trip that included Art Wolf, Mark Dubovoy, Jeff Shuey, and we talk about every aspect of photography. We go out shooting with people, early morning, late afternoon. Great fun. We were out in an area called the Palouse, which is the northeastern end of Washington State, right along the Idaho border. And it's a beautiful wheat-growing area with lovely rolling hills and old deserted farms. Very beautiful.
Wow.
So, that was fun, and I've been back now for a few days and getting over my minor jet lag.
Oh, yeah.
But it's only 3 hours to the West Coast. But more than that, it's the getting up at 4 a.m. every morning and being out shooting till 9 o'clock every night. That takes its toll.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, that's the photographer's leg, not the jet lag, basically, of
that's
getting
right.
up early. Yeah, fantastic. No, the POTA series is a very exciting way of, I think, a major high-end manufacturer connecting with their audience and getting a really good, feedback loop, not just to promote the products and provide a great high-quality workshop, but also to get a great feedback loop directly from the ground, I guess, and I think that's what makes the products so much more practical, I guess.
Well, you wouldn't buy a $50,000 car without doing some research and some test driving.
Right. And
similarly, you won't buy a $25,000 to $50,000 camera system without the experience. So what Phase has done is they've created these seminars all over the world. They do fascinating things. There's one going on this week, I think, in the UK, which is about fashion.
Right.
They have one coming up in Death Valley, interestingly enough, for Chinese. They're bringing over Chinese photoghraphers to shoot in Death Valley.
Wow.
And that should be absolutely fascinating.
That's very interesting. This is, I wonder how the Phase 1 digital back interface looks in Chinese.
I don't know, but China is now one of the world's biggest markets for high-end photographic equipment. When you've got 3 billion people and 35% of them are middle class.
That's more than
better by our standards.
Right.
That's more than North America, more than Europe.
Right.
You know, a lot of people don't realize it, but you know, you go to Beijing or Shanghai and you see more Mercedes and BMWs and Chanel and Louis Vuitton and you know all of the high-end consumer goods there than you do in New York or Paris or Rome. So yeah, I mean, major market.
Yeah, 35% of 1.5 billion, that's more than people live in America. I mean,
exactly.
And that's all middle class.
That's right. That's right.
So, you know, it's a big market. But let's get to our topic today. From camera to screen and print is the reason...
No, to print and screen.
Oh, sorry, to print and screen. I thought it goes first to the screen and then to the printer. But anyways.
Well,
okay.
I'm just pulling your chain.
Okay, that's good. Is a new tutorial that you recently published or rolling out over the summer and the fall on the Luminous Landscape, and there has been a very well received earlier version of it, a first version of it that was just from camera to print. I don't know how many years back, 3 or 4 years back.
4 years.
4 years, yeah.
And it was done by Jeff Shuey and I.
Right.
I feel was it 2007.
Exactly, yeah. And so you've done a new version of it, and I wanted to talk about it. I have what is available so far and what you've produced and published, and we can look into a couple of clips. But first of all, let's dive into what motivated you to go. Obviously, I mean, it's a very long tutorial when it's completed, probably over 10 hours, I would guess.
Yeah, it'll be in the 9 to 10 hour range.
Right. What made you go through the process of picking all the details up again and go through it? I would guess it's all the changes that have occurred since the first version of it.
Well, when we first thought of redoing it, we thought about it and said, well, you know, not that much has changed. There are some new models of printers, but, you know, the basics of printing technology and color management, you know, really haven't changed that much. But a lot of people were under the impression that if it's 4 years old, it's got to be stale. But then when we started thinking about it a little more closely, we realized that an awful lot has changed.
Right.
There are a new generation of printers, new generation of monitors, calibration systems, papers, inks, and of course, the reason that we added the word and screen is that more and more people are now using tablet devices and smartphones and, of course, their computers with web sharing sites, social media sites. So we realized that, you know, preparing files not just for print but also for screen was an important discussion. And as we started working up our plans for how to do it and what to do, we realized an awful lot has changed.
Right.
So here we are, and we shot it over the period of about a week. Chris, editing takes forever, and rather than, because people have to understand, this isn't the typical video tutorials where someone does a screen grab with a voiceover.
Right.
No, this is live on a set with 3 cameras, myself and Jeff Shuey, and we're not only on camera, but we're recording the screen, we're recording an over-the-shoulder camera shot, we do live action things, so this is very much like watching a cooking show on TV, if you will.
Yeah. It's very much also, you know, it's not just a cut and dry sort of recipe, you know, press this button, go there, you know, pull up that dialogue, use this setting. It's a more, you know, I guess set back and look at the process from a human perspective, and there's a lot of conversation between you and Jeff and what the background of the development is and all this.
The reason for that, Peter, is not because we want to be chatty,
right?
But because we want people to understand what is taking place behind the scenes.
Right. What's the thinking? Right.
Yeah, so just, press this button and it'll do something.
Right.
Just is not teaching.
Exactly.
Why will it do something? And what will happen if you do it a different way? So these are the things that we try and really dive into. And so, 8, 9, 10 hours of live video is equivalent to a 300 to 400 page book.
Absolutely.
So there's a ton of content there, and they're very hard to do. To do well, and a lot of work. And then, what we're doing is, rather than wait 4 months for Chris to edit the whole thing, we're releasing it with new chunks every few weeks. So
Right.
As they become available, they're uploaded and people can download them the minute that they become available. As a matter of fact, I think we're due in a few days for another big batch.
That's great. No, I think that's a great approach, and so people can work through them and take their time. And there's something new coming, out of the box every few weeks, which is also exciting to get something new and to look forward to. I think it's great, and there's a lot of humor in it too, which keeps you going basically through 10 hours of video too. That has to. And if it's too dry and there's no bantering and no fun in it,
right.
Then it's just too tedious, I think.
Well, Jeff and I have to keep each other awake while we're doing that. And we figure if we keep each other awake, we'll keep the viewer awake.
Yeah, and from my experience, Jeff's shirt colors and patterns are helping a lot to keep that going.
We're going to have a contest at the end, and when the person who is the first to tell us how many different shirts Jeff wore will win something. I don't know what.
Okay, you heard it. You heard it here first.
We haven't thought of what the prize will be yet.
Okay, fantastic.
2 weeks at Saskatoon or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, but in the middle of December, of course.
In the middle of December.
Yeah. So here we go. Let's have a look at a couple of clips that I want to show at least a section of or a preview of. And here is the first one, which is about image quality in general. So you started off basically with talking about what is image quality all about, and it's not just about the processing, but also, of course, how to prepare and how to get a good capture. So let's have a look, and then we can talk about it in a minute. So here we go.
This whole tutorial is about achieving the best possible image quality on a print or on screen. Mm-hmm. But as we touched on in the introduction, this really has to all start with a quality image, aesthetically and technically.
Yeah.
So why don't we first look briefly at some of the technical things that people, you're just not going to get good print if you don't start with a good image. Mm-hmm. And that means a sharp image, well exposed. So let's run them down.
Mm-hmm. Well exposed, sharp lens, good lens, no motion blur, so a shutter speed suitable for...
Right. For either the focal length of lens, hand holding, that means image stabilization if you have it.
And it's funny because...
Or a good tripod.
Yeah, or we used to talk about 2x over the focal length as the minimum shutter speed. And I think we've talked about increasing that now to 3x.
Well, it used to be 1x in the days of film. Then it was 2x, and as we got into higher resolution digital, I don't even know anymore. I did some shooting with my medium format back the other day, hand holding a short lens at a 2/50th, and I could see motion blur. So I'm at the point now where I don't want to shoot anything with a high res back, for example, unless it's on a tripod.
Yeah. Well, for example, last year when we shot in Joshua Tree, one of the things that you did and then I did, using a quality tripod, I didn't always have my center column all the way down.
Right.
And I do have
and Chris has some footage showing that you had your column up, which makes it a monopod, not a tripod.
Yes, but that was actually with a wide-angle lens, not the telephoto.
All right, you're forgiven.
The other thing is to be able to shoot with mirror lockup. Just the flopping of the mirror and the focal plane shutter has a big impact on the potential sharpness, particularly if it's a longish lens.
And live view is one of the things that if you're shooting in live view mode, you already have the mirror up. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. One of the advantages of the Alpha camera those little lenses with the little leaf shutters.
Leaf shutters, right? Instead of focal plane shutters.
Yeah.
Remember, I've talked about this online and in other tutorials. On some cameras, the shutter actually causes the camera to vibrate. I know one of the biggest, guiltiest parties in that was the Pentax 6.7. What a wonderful camera that was. But the shutter was so big. Yeah. And even on a DSLR, a Nikon, a Canon, there are certain shutter speeds in the half-second, quarter-second range.
Okay, let's cut it there and have a look at general image quality, of course, is important in terms of the capture, Michael. And there's a lot of things that have changed with the higher resolutions, the higher pixel pitch that we get in digital SLRs, and then of course in the even higher end medium format digital cameras today. And of course there is mirror lockup, shutter vibration, all these kind of things that we need to watch out for, proper shooting techniques. But what about the things that are getting more and more difficult to actually get a grip on? For instance, the diffraction versus resolution versus aperture setting issues. Is there what's your recommendations on that? Because I've been doing my own experiments, and it is true that with a higher 20 megapixel plus camera. On a full frame system, you get diffraction anywhere above f5, 6, f8 visible and lose sharpness. And yet, when you're out in the landscape, you do need very often, extreme depth of field to cover a scene.
Well, as the joke goes, there's good news and there's bad news.
Absolutely.
The good news is the current generation of high-end digital camera systems is incredibly good. The ability to resolve detail and nuances of tonalities and all the rest of it is great. The bad news is that particularly when you're making large prints, what it does is puts tremendous demands on you and your camera system. Now, a lot of people don't understand what diffraction is, and you can,
Wikipedia.
While you're watching this, go on Wikipedia, Google diffraction, and what you'll see, it's basically when you close the shutter on a camera, the blades basically become a blocker of the beams of light. So the light is going through the blades, and it's actually bouncing around the curve of the blades. And the smaller the aperture, the less light comes through, the more the light diverges after it comes off the shutter blades. Some shutters are very smooth. The blade, they have lots and lots of blades, and that produces very nice bokeh, which is a Japanese word meaning the smoothness of the out of focus areas.
Right.
Some lenses have very coarse bokeh, and that's because typically the shutter blades have lots of angles to them.
Right.
So theoretically, a perfect lens is at its best wide open. And any shutting down of the aperture blades causes some diffraction. Now, in the days of film, this was not that big a deal.
Right.
And particularly you're shooting 4x5 or 8x10 sheet film, and you could stop down to f32, 45, f64 even.
Right.
As a matter of fact, the famous school of photography was called the f64 school.
Right.
Back after the turn of the century. The previous one, the 19th one.
Right.
And that was a hallmark of large format photography, because of course when you're shooting with an 8x10 view camera and a normal lens is 150 to 200 millimeters, your depth of field is very limited.
Right.
So photography is all about compromise, isn't it? We are constantly balancing aperture, shutter speed, ISO.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Ideally, we'd love to always shoot at 1,000th of a second, unless we're going for image blur, but let's assume for technical quality, very high shutter speed, so we're not dealing with shutter bounce and mirror bounce and, camera vibration and hand vibration. We'd like to be able to shoot with an aperture, whether it's small or large, depending on whether we want shallow depth of field or deep depth of field.
Right.
But you say, well, gee, okay, you look at your depth of field table, or, if you're using an older lens that actually has real honest-to-goodness depth of field scales on it.
Right.
You look at it and you say, that's, I guess I need f/16.
Right.
But the reality is, at f/16, you're into diffraction.
Right.
And what does that mean? It means your image quality is being reduced.
Right.
So your really
image quality in terms of sharpness
Canon,
that you can achieve on the image.
Yeah, in terms of sharpness, resolution.
Right.
If your lens and sensor were capable of, pick a number, 100 line pairs per millimeter, which maybe is almost about as good as it gets.
Right.
Now you shoot at f/16 and you're probably down to 70.
Right.
Still okay, but not as good as it could be.
Exactly.
So the solution that I've come up with is I no longer care about diffraction. I'm now talking about doing landscape, nature, not for doing sports photography, but for doing things where image quality is paramount, and I do what's called focus stitching.
Right.
So what you do is, let's say you've got a flower here 2 feet in front of the camera, and then the distant mountain range. Even stop down to f/64, you're not going to be able to get maximum depth of field. And if you put on a wide angle lens, which some people think gives them more depth of field, all you're going to do is take in more, and wide angle lenses don't give you more depth of field. For the same image magnification.
Right.
Their depth of field is exactly the same as a telephoto lens.
Right.
In any event, that's another story. So what I do is focus bracketing. So flowers in the foreground, bushes in the midground, mountains in the background, and I will do one frame focused on the flower, then I'll focus the lens a little further, shot, further, shot, further, shot, further, shot, and I'll do 4, 5, 6, 7 different frames.
Right.
You do them quickly. All it takes is a quick turn. You're in manual focus mode, not auto.
Right.
Manual exposure mode. You don't want your exposure to change just because a cloud moved a little bit in front of the sun. And you just do 4, 5, 6, 7 quick exposures. Now, if you have Photoshop, you can do an okay job of blending.
Right.
But that's not what I recommend, because it doesn't work all that well.
Yeah.
What you need to do is buy a program, and the best of them, to my knowledge and to my experience, is called Helicon or Helicon Focus.
Right.
And you buy Helicon Focus, and you click on those 5 or 6 or 7 files, and you say, "Do it to me!" And 9 times out of 10, it produces the most brilliant photo stitch you could imagine.
Right.
You can look at 200% on screen and not see where it's stitched the various layers.
Right.
Occasionally it'll make a mistake or something moved in the frame, but then it's very easy to go in, and what you basically do is, it's almost like layers in Photoshop. You say, layer 5 is actually better than layer 4. And so what you do is you take the brush on screen,
right,
and you just brush layer 4 on top of layer 5.
Right.
And it's a very simple, anybody can do it kind of thing. But 9 times out of 10, it's totally automated. The program's a couple of $100. It's well worth it. And I no longer worry about using tilt for depth of field, Scheimpflug effect on a technical camera. I no longer worry about diffraction. I stop my lens down, typically 1 or 2 stops from wide open. That's the sweet spot.
Right.
So depending on the lens, it could be 4, 5, 6, 8. I rarely go lower than f8. I will, for example, if I'm shooting a pole vaulter at a sports event,
right,
if I lose a little bit of resolution, big deal,
right,
but I want to make sure that he's not out of focus as he goes over the bar.
Right.
And that's it. Helicon Focus.
Right.
It is, I don't like sliced bread, but if I did, I would say it is the greatest thing since sliced bread.
That's true. It's a fantastic tool. I recently used it with some flower and macro photography, where obviously with macro you have huge depth of field issues most of the time, and it's been a tool, especially since if you do flower photography indoors, nothing moves. Right. Lighting is controllable. And so you can go through 10 exposures and process them, put them in healing focus, and get perfect focus from start to end. Actually, in fact, I noticed that in a lot of pictures, I actually choose not to take every step along the line, because at some point I want something to go out of focus. If the stem of a flower or whatever is in the background, I don't want to see it in perfect focus necessarily. But then that raises another couple of questions that I want to bring up that I discovered. First of all, does that mean filters are back for you in the field? And I you know why I'm asking that question, probably because if you focus stitch and you also exposure bracket, you end up with already, instead of 8 or 10 exposures for the focus bracket, you end up with probably 20 or 25 exposures for.
And if you're doing a pano.
And that's where I went like, oh my God, this is going to go crazy. Like how, obviously perfect image quality is always going to cost you something, but it doesn't have to be institutionalization necessarily. You know what I mean? From the field joke, to the cell.
The old joke, the guy goes to the doctor and he says, doctor, whenever I hit my head against the wall, it hurts. And the doctor says, stop hitting your head against the wall.
Right.
So, sorry about that.
No problem. You can take the call.
No, I'm just turning it off. So it's one of those things. No, don't do, focus stitching, exposure stitching, and pano stitching all at the same time.
Yeah.
Unless, you don't have a life, in which case...
or you can replace the L in life with the W, and then maybe then you can do it.
Yeah, I've never done all three. I've sometimes done 2 of the 3.
Right.
But no, I draw the line at doing all 3 at once.
Right, and it's easier if you have you're fortunate to have a 80 some megapixel back, then you're not so worried about stitching for resolution.
No, exactly.
Right.
But when I was out on the Phase 1 workshop last week, I did quite a number of focus stitch shots and then Helicon. Now. An 80 megapixel Phase 1 back produces a 475 megabyte TIFF
file
in 16-bit.
Right.
So if you have 7 of these,
you talk
at approximately 500 meg each, that's 3.5 gig of files.
Right, and they all have to go into memory to do it, right?
Right. And so what happens is you have to have, an 8-core 12 gigabyte Mac Pro, terabyte hard drives, all of that goes without saying. And then when you start it going, your computer says, "Are you kidding me? You want me to do what?" Go
and come back tomorrow. Yeah.
Well, no, it's not even tomorrow. It could be half an hour, 45 minutes. Right. But you know what? It'll do it. Right. And I've done it. Right. Definitely, 2, 3, 4 gigabyte stitches are really not that big a deal if you have enough RAM, and RAM is cheap, and hard drives are cheap. I just want to digress slightly. I was on one of the forums just browsing around the other day, and I read someone complaining about the new Sony cameras with their 24 megapixel sensors, and he says, "Oh, but they produce such big files and they take up so much hard disk space." I mean, excuse me. Terabyte drives are now $75.
Right. They're almost as cheap as sliced bread.
Hey. $75 for 1,000 gigabytes?
Right.
Give me a break.
Yeah.
There's no such thing anymore as a big file.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and unless it's bigger than the drive, the file. If it's bigger than a terabyte, then that's a big file, but
that's not until 2015.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But then we'll have petabyte drives.
Absolutely.
A
No,
petabyte, I think, is a what is that? Is that 1,000 terabytes?
that's 1,000 terabytes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's crazy. Yeah, but so. But why I was asking filters, I mean, this could mean that in the field, at some situations, you would want a graduated neutral density filter again to bring down the sky, so you don't have to bracket focus and bracket exposure.
No. ETTR.
ETTR.
Exposed to the right.
Good. That's a very good segue. ETTR. You discuss in.
You wanted that segue. I know you wanted that segue.
That's perfect. Okay, let's have another look at another clip from your latest tutorial, from camera to print and screen, not the other way around, and see what ETTR is, and then we can talk about it, because it's a concept that Michael brought into the world, basically, of photography, and I think it's still a very important aspect of doing quality image capture. So have a look.
I went out intentionally to shoot a scene that would allow me to show people that ETTR, exposed to the right, actually does work. So this was shot on an auto bracket, up and down 1 2/3 stop, and then normal. So let's see what this looks like. Here is the histogram in camera raw of what the underexposed image looks like, and you can see that the mass of the image is down low.
That's exposed to the left.
That's exposed to the left. Correct. Here is the middle exposure, which arguably, and this was an auto exposure, I did an auto bracket, is arguably underexposed. There's still some black clipping going on.
There's some black clipping, and you've got a little bit of room over here in the highlights.
Well, cameras have this tendency of being conservative. Many of the digital SLR cameras have a conservative factor in when they're showing the flashing for clipping up to a stop.
But can I also tell you, part of the problem is the manufacturers expose the shot so that the shot will look good on the LCD on the back of the camera. And you know that. It's not so that it's exposed optimally, it's so that it's exposed to look pretty.
Film-like.
Exactly. People want the image on the LCD to look like a transparency. Hold on, go, oh, that's perfect, that's lovely. But it's not. It's usually underexposed by anywhere from 2/3 of a stop to a stop and a half.
So here is the plus 1 2/3, and example, you look at that on the back of the LCD and it looks
too bright. It's too bright.
Because it's not normalized. And then here's what the histogram is. In camera raw, this is showing clipping, and that's something that you have to get over. It's really what it's doing is clumping, not clipping. There is nothing in here that was so bright that it would clip at the sensor.
And nothing there is at 255.
Correct. So the 3 exposures, I can successfully normalize them in camera raw or Lightroom.
Okay, so what you've done with each of these is you've made them look as normal
as close to each other as possible. And from here, it looks
and at this side, it looks fine. You could have been off by a stop or two and still have know, a reasonable on-screen image at least.
So here is the minus 1 2/3, and you can see that the redistribution of the data is up the scale to lighten the image. Here is the normal exposure that I've lightened a bit. And the thing that's kind of interesting is that here are the 2 histograms, one from the minus 1 2/3 and one from the normal, and they look very similar.
That's amazing.
So then here is the normalized up 1 2/3, and you'll see all the clipping is gone. So,
and just let me interject for a second, because one of the things that always annoys me, and I like jabbing the manufacturers when they don't do things the way they should. Video cameras, you can set the clipping point. You can say you want it at 80, 90, 100, 110, depending on what you need. Stills cameras, even the high-end Nikons and Canons, you can't. Why not?
Okay, Michael, you're right. Why not? Why can't camera manufacturers give us that option to put in clipping points so we can adjust it to our own liking?
I don't know. Ask them.
And you've done that on your website many times, of course.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Well, yes, I love, doing a little twist. First of all, let me just say a couple of things. If people looking at that clip will see that it looks like I have leprosy. I did not have leprosy. What I did is very, very foolishly, we scheduled the shooting of this, which was a week's shoot. And 2 days before, I realized that I had a dermatologist appointment to remove some, sun damage.
Right.
And if you've ever had that done, you realize you end up with scabs. Right. And the scabs last for a few weeks. It's no big deal. But when I got on set, Chris said, "What have you done?" I'm sorry. It takes 6 months to get an appointment with the dermatologist, so I wasn't about to change it. Anyhow, so that's an aside.
So you look very good, and that is great to see. So this time, and
thank you.
No big deal.
But no, it was one of those things. We decided not to even talk about it.
Right.
It's just if you think it's a problem, fine, big deal. Which is again back to what we're talking about is. It's one of my pet peeves with manufacturers. They are still producing cameras that expose as if they were shooting film.
Right.
They, expose for 18% gray, and let me draw on my screen here. So they create a histogram that fills the middle.
Right.
Well, that's not the best exposure.
Not
the best exposure is over here on the right side of the histogram. And why is that? Because that's where the signal to noise ratio is the greatest.
Right.
And just very quickly, and we go into this in detail in the video, the way digital works is most of the signal is over here. Mm-hmm. And as you move down into the darker areas, there's less and less and less signal. So over here, you may have in an 8-bit world, and there aren't any 8-bit cameras anymore, but it makes the numbers easy. Of the 4,096 tonal values, shades of gray, half of them, 50%, are in the first stop.
Exactly.
These very lightest tones.
Right.
And then the next half and the next half. So down here in the deep shadows, what you have is maybe 30 or 40 tonal values.
Right.
So now think about signal to noise ratio. What's signal to noise? It's the ratio of the signal, which is the light, to the noise, which is, heat, cosmic rays, shot noise, all the things that are inherent. It's the fuzz when you look at a TV screen without a signal.
Right. Exactly.
It's the hiss on your stereo system.
Right.
When you crank the volume up. It's just electronic noise. So the problem is down in the shadows and in the highlights, we have the same amount of noise, but in the shadows we have a very low signal, and in the highlights we have a very high signal. Mm-hmm. So where do you want to put your image? Willie, what was the guy's name? Willie Sutton was asked, famous bank robber. Willie, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Exactly. Why do you want to put your image over here on the right of the histogram? Because that's where the data is.
Exactly.
Right. So lots of data, low noise, left side, lots of data, high noise.
Right. But Michael, one question for you on this spot, which I think it fits really well. Is it just about noise, or is it also about tonal values that give you more room to edit without getting banking and posterization and so on?
This is an area of debate. The reality is you have lots of tonal values up here, and you have a small number of tonal values down here.
Right.
There are those that say yes, but. And because you're down into the noise over here in the shadows, you can't see the fact that there are only a small number of tonal values. Now, I maintain you can. But you know what? It's a quibbly debate.
Right.
And it isn't really the important debate. The important debate is about noise, and that's irrefutable. No one can argue that. And so the thing is, so what should manufacturers do? What manufacturers, if you think about it, a live view camera, so a DSLR in live view mode, or one of the new compact system cameras,
Right.
The mirrorless generation, these all have live sensors. They are reading the amount of light hitting every one of those 12, 18, 24 million pixels. They're reading every one of those pixels. They know how much light is hitting every pixel.
Right.
Why? And of course, they're showing you a live histogram. Why can't they just say, you know what, all this nonsense about metering, it's irrelevant. Because all we want to do is we want to make an exposure that puts the data as far to the right, as far into the highlight tones as possible without clipping.
Right.
In other words, not 255,
Right.
254 and below.
Right.
And if we do that, in a lot of cases, the image is going to look overexposed.
On the back of the
So,
screen, or
on the back when you look at the screen,
Right.
or when you bring the file into
your raw converter.
Lightroom
Right.
or Aperture, whatever it is.
Right.
So you say, well, we understand that. We understand that amateurs want to see the picture on the back of their camera look nice. That's fine. You know how much you've exposed to the right. Stop and a half. Great. Compensate the JPEG in camera that you're producing, because every camera produces an in-camera JPEG, even if it's just to embed in the raw file.
Exactly.
And to display on the back of the camera when you do your chimping. Normalize that.
Yeah.
Right? Just knock it down and stop and a half. It'll look pretty, but your raw file will have an optimized exposure.
We'll have the best data. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, you talk to the very nice engineers at some of the bigger companies, and I won't say which one, but you say to them, well, gee, okay, what happens if you get a raw file that is quote-unquote overexposed? What do you do with it? And they said, no-brainer. All of the file formats, the DNG format, for example, has a field called normalization.
Right.
And all you do is you put the number -1.5 in there, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And now, when the file comes in, it's normalized on your on-screen preview.
Yeah.
if that's what the way you want.
The raw converter can pick it up and just put the same normalization on. Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So none of this is rocket science. It just requires a mindset on the part of the manufacturers to give us something better.
Yeah, and you know what?
They're
I think
more interested in giving us bells and whistles.
Right.
Grandma playing with the puppy in smiling mode.
yeah, make her smile mode. Yeah, it's I think I can understand the manufacturers on one end that they want to make it as easy as possible for the beginner picking up an $800 SLR to get a pretty picture on the back of the screen and in JPEG, and and even if they dabble in RAW at the beginning, they don't know what they're doing and they don't want to see white out pictures or whatever. I understand all that, but you could say as a manufacturer, any camera beyond $2,000 plus, at least give them an expert mode.
Well, I was just going to say,
Right.
What's the matter with dummy mode?
Expert mode. Exactly. Dummy
that's
mode
fine.
is
hide that stuff from the person who isn't interested.
just like
But
a camera is set to sRGB by standard, and you have to go in and put it to Adobe RGB. Same thing, right? You go in and say, okay, I want the ETTR mode, or I want standard exposure mode. That's it.
Yeah.
Anyhow, that's it. Hopefully they'll listen at some point. So you think
they'll never listen.
long story short, you think ETTR?
What would I do if they listened? I'd have nothing to bitch about.
Well, you'd shut down your website and finally have some time for your family.
Exactly.
So you think to close the loop, you think ETTR is often the solution instead of a graduated filter to focus bracket?
It depends.
It depends how much dynamic range there's required, right?
It depends on the dynamic range of your camera, and it depends on the dynamic range of the scene.
Right.
And so what I would say is the latest generation of cameras have on average 10, 11, 12 stops of dynamic range.
Right.
And if you use ETTR and your scene is not, gigantic, 15 stops of dynamic range,
right,
then you're fine without filters.
Right.
But I still don't use filters. I've got $1,000 worth of Lee filters and Lee filter holder and all that, which I haven't touched in years, because it's then just as easily, if you find yourself in a situation like that, just do a second shot underexposed by or overexposed by 2 stops, capture the extra shadow detail, and do a merge.
Right.
It's just so much of this stuff can now be done on the computer, and even the manufacturers. I mean, Sony now has these auto modes on some, even their point and shoots,
right,
that do exposure blending.
Yeah, I guess one great trick is, I was saying, in a normal situation you take 2 shots, a normal exposed or high exposed or low exposed, and then you merge. That's fine. But if you focus bracket, you have 10 shots, and then you want to do the same. But then a good trick very often in most situations I found is that the sky is usually the problem, being hot, of course, but the sky is always at infinity for most of the time as well. So what you can do is you can expose for the foreground and the middle ground, and do your exposure your focus bracketing, and when you come to the last shot, which is infinity, do it twice. Do it once at a regular exposure, which is overexposed for the sky, and then underexposed by whatever you need to compensate for.
Yeah, you could do that. It's quite true. But if you've got a big enough, fast enough computer, set your camera to auto bracketing, 3-shot.
Right.
And you're going to also do a focus stitch. So you go 1 click, do, takes 3.
Right.
Defocus. 1 click, do.
Right.
Defocus. And so now you have 15 to 20 frames. Still not a big deal.
Right.
Not a big deal to blend them.
Right.
Requires a little bit of work, but you know what? We have it too easy.
Right.
People are lazy.
Yeah.
Used
to haul around.
Do it.
Used to haul around at an 8x10 with 10 film holders and have to process film and scan film, or go into a lab, and it was a much bigger process than merging a few exposures. Anyways, let me take a short break to thank my sponsors here so we can continue doing the show. First of all, I like to thank ThinkTel, of course, our partner from the very beginning of SMIPS TV and our photography shows. ThinkTel is a web-based, internet-based telephony provider that provides unified phone and voice services all across North America. So if you want to simplify the way how you use your telephone, you want to go from, like Michael does in the winter, go to Mexico, or you have a corporation where you move a lot between buildings, you can have your phone number basically follow you, including your voicemail from a mobile phone as well as your landline, etc. And of course you save lots of money for long distance calls, because what they do is they come in with a little black box, hook it up to your regular phone system, so all the wiring, all the phones, the switchboard, everything stays the same in between that and the internet connection, and all of a sudden your phone service goes over the internet, and they can scale up the number of lines that you use dynamically. If you have a season in the year where there's lots of business, you can have more lines, you can scale it back down on the fingertip basically. So check out ThinkTel. They're great people to work with at thinktel.net. And then, of course, I also like to thank our sponsors at Webcall Labs that provide hosting and storage for all of our shows, so you can download them on Facebook. If you like the episodes that we're doing today, give us a good rating, and so more people get to see it. And at webcalllabs.com, they can help you to create a more sophisticated website and host it appropriately with great performance and fantastic support. So check out webcalllabs.com if you want to host your own website with a really capable hosting provider. Thanks for our sponsors, and thank you for them staying with us, and we look forward to work with them in the future. Michael, we have another 10 minutes or so, and there's a couple of more topics, of course, and I want to have a bit of a more overview. What is to come in the rest of the From Camera to Print and Screen tutorials, and the other question is, when do we get what is it called, soft proof in Lightroom? And not just
if I told you, I'd have to kill you.
Okay, well. That would be worth a try, maybe. I mean, I can submit myself to the world of photography, sort of. No, but the question is, do you still soft proof? Because I know you print a lot out of Lightroom itself. Do you go into the loop through Photoshop a lot? Is that something that's part of the tutorial?
It depends.
Okay.
It depends. There are two. What you'll see in our From Camera to Print and Screen video, and because of course we go into all of this, we go into color management and soft proofing and screen profiling and calibrating and paper choices, and I mean, you name it. It's, if it has anything to do with taking the picture out of your camera and then doing something with it, we probably cover it in depth.
Right.
End of plug.
Keep plugging. That's okay. That's what the whole episode is about.
Yeah, right. Thank you. But do I still soft proof? Yes, occasionally. First of all, if the gamut of the image is going to be out of gamut on your print, then it's probably a good idea. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, with the latest generation of inks and papers, and by that I'm talking about the Epson printers, which are the ones I'm familiar with most, the Epson 3880, the Epson 4000, the Epson 9 series, like the 9700 and 9900 and 4900, that latest generation of Epson printers using the HDR inks in particular. The gamut on those inks, when printed on the latest generation of papers like Ilford Gold Fiber Silk or Canson Barita Photographique, the gamut is astonishing. Mm-hmm. It's huge. I mean, there are just not that many colors that are out of gamut. Mm-hmm. And so if your image doesn't have out of gamut colors, then what you see is what you get. Mm-hmm. Now, that applies certainly to the color gamut. Soft proofing can still be valuable to help you visualize the way that the image is going to look on paper, because, of course, a screen, such as we are all looking at now, is a backlit device. It's transilluminated. Right. A print is front lit, and it's a reflective medium, right. So it's not going to be as bright, it's not going to be as contrasty.
Yeah, saturation and contrast are usually a little bit off, right? And that's what you might want to compensate for.
Right. So if you soft proof and you try and do it so that you get a sense of what the image will look like, but the answer is no. I don't soft proof that much. One of the things, if you do have an out of gamut image, what you want to know is should you be using relative or absolute? And that is something that you can only see when you're soft proofing, or by actually making two prints and then seeing which one, which is the most appropriate way of dealing with the out of gamut colors.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's not a big deal to pop into Photoshop out of Lightroom or out of any other program that you might use, Camera Raw or Aperture, and just have a quick look at it and soft proof in Photoshop. Right. Every version of Photoshop for about the last 3 versions, I think, going back 5-6 years, is capable of soft proofing. But the answer, to be really truthful, no, I don't. I probably only soft proof 1 out of every 5 or 6 images, because I look at it and I go, yeah, I know what it's going to look like. I know the differences that are going to be between the screen and the print, and
experience comes to hand there, of course, as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm lazy.
Good to know. Okay, there's two more questions about in that topic. When you soft proof, something that nobody in the photography industry who has been able to tell me really or give me a good answer for is when you soft proof, you have two options there that are often confusing to photographers. One is black point compensation. Do you use it or do you don't? And secondly, simulate paper colors.
Okay.
Which means basically the color, no ideal, no perfect white as a paper color. And the paper color is often, the question is that I don't get an answer for, is the paper color simulation part of the profile or is it just Photoshop putting some paper color in there?
It's part of the profile. When a profile is made, the spectrophotometer is reading the white of the paper as well as whatever ink is on it. So if you have a yellowy paper or a bluish paper, it's going to read that. And when you go to the simulate paper color and ink, what you're doing, Jeff Shuey calls it the look shitty button. Yeah. Because what it does is the image on your screen will become a lot dimmer and lower contrast.
Right.
And that's because what we were talking about before. But if you look at it in isolation, then it doesn't look so bad. And the reason it doesn't look so bad is you have to understand one of the realities of human vision is your eye white balances and brightness balances what it sees based on the brightest thing in your field of vision.
Right.
So if you have the room over there, lit brightly, or you have your viewing box on with a brightly lit print on it,
right,
and now you're sitting here, that is influencing what you're looking at.
Right.
But if you have nothing else brighter than the screen in front of you, and you're not trying to do a direct side-by-side comparison, then the look shitty button actually is the look accurate button.
Exactly.
So there's that aspect. As far as black point compensation,
so you recommend to do paper color simulation when you do soft proofing, is that right?
Do I recommend it? Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't.
Okay.
There are no rules on this.
Okay.
It's does it work for you?
Okay. Yeah.
Does it answer a question about the image that you have?
Right.
And if it does, fine. If not, don't sweat it.
Right.
Let me just, before we forget, I want to talk about the black point compensation.
Right.
What that is this is black.
Mm-hmm.
And this is black.
Yeah.
There are lots of different blacks.
Exactly.
And the black that the ink on your paper can reproduce may not be the black that the darkest part of your screen can reproduce.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what the question it's asking you is, do you want me to show you the black the way it is, or the black the way
it will print?
It will print.
Exactly.
That's what black point compensation is.
Exactly. Yeah.
And again, season to taste.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Good. So that's a lot. That's a lot to digest, of course. But these are all things that you will cover, I think, in your tutorials. And so I can only recommend for people to go and get it if they want to get the best possible print quality and screen quality out of their images. It's a fantastic way of learning. It's quick. It's enjoyable. It's entertaining. And it's much better than buying a big book with cooking recipes, as I call them, where you get like a 1-by-1, click by click, and after the page 15 you put it aside because you're bored out of your mind. So
and if you order it, you'll have the satisfaction of knowing that my children will eat tonight.
That's very good to know, Michael. I'm not so worried about your children, to be honest with you, but that's fantastic.
I thought I'd try it.
Yeah.
might make an extra sale.
An extra sale or two, yeah. It's definitely going to help. So here's another thing. I don't know if you've heard of Joseph Holmes. Probably you did before.
Of course.
And he wrote a really interesting essay, I would call it, on his website, and we can have a look here on my computer. It's at josephholmes.com, and he has created his own profiles for scanning images off of transparencies originally, and then also later for digital photography and processing. And he argues, and that's a really interesting point, and it's not the lightest of material to digest if you haven't dabbled into color management before. But basically, he says, okay, there's different color spaces. ProPhoto is a very large color space. sRGB, on the other hand, is a very small color space. As a working space, it's great to have, it's recommended to have a large color space. But what he says is it's actually better to have your RAW converter, like Camera Raw can do it, convert to the ideal color space, working space for an image, and then assign other spaces as you need growth in the color space, because what you don't want is a huge color space in an image for an image that has needs for smaller, room in that space essentially. And then when you convert from ProPhoto to your printing space, which is your profile from your printer, then you potentially squash that image into a smaller space relative to the paper, and it can have very negative effects on the image quality. Have you ever given that whole scenario a thought?
That's way above my pay grade.
Okay, I find it very interesting.
I'll answer it this way. I believe that 3 angels can dance on the head of a pin.
Okay.
Not 4. Yeah. You think I'm kidding?
yeah, I do.
Have you ever seen 4 angels on the head of a pin?
I've never seen an angel on the head of a pin, period. But you have to explain.
Oh. In the Middle Ages, those were the ecclesiastical debates.
Okay.
How many angels can dance on the head of a pin? Well, obviously just 1, but of course they're angels, so they can do anything.
Right.
And those were the debates that they had in the Middle Ages.
And they were kind of pointless, so...
Yeah. Let's put it this way. I have tremendous respect for Joe Holmes.
Yeah.
He's probably one of the most knowledgeable, hardworking people in the industry.
Right.
And made some great contributions. And he has forgotten more about this stuff than I'll ever know. Having said that, I don't know. Let's go for a beer.
Okay. All right, let's drop that one. Great, Michael. What?
Glad you asked.
What? What's that? Why did I ask?
No, I'm glad you asked.
Well, okay, yeah. I wanna, yeah.
So make a few jokes.
Yeah, you pulled my chain at the beginning about print.
Teach you a little bit about religious debates in the Middle Ages.
Can you come a little closer to the camera? A little closer with your forehead. Okay. Do I see a little bit of sweat there at the top of your head? Did I break your sweat there? I think I did it.
3 angels.
Okay.
Only 3.
Okay. Well, you're the master of distraction, that's for sure. But okay. So what else is coming? What can I expect in my inbox for the rest of from camera to print and screen? I mean, you said it's a lot to come. I'm interested. You said one thing you said is face mounting on Plexi. There will be something besides just the digital process.
Canvas printing.
Very good. Yeah.
Preparing your images for iPads and other tablets, preparing them for use on the web. Oh my goodness, it's just, paper choices. We look at all the different kinds of papers and what to choose and why to choose it, how to make your own profiles. If you're going to have someone make them for you, how to go about doing that. Right. Using manufacturers' profiles. Right. Print settings. How to set up your printer properly. Mm-hmm. Get all of those stupid annoying dialog boxes all set properly. Right. No, I mean, printing there's a lot of nonsense in the field of printing. And part of the problem is that there are too many cooks spoiling this broth. Right. If you think about it, you have the operating system of your computer. Right. You have the application that you're running. Let's call it Photoshop or Lightroom. You have the printer profile. You have the printer driver. Right. You have 4 or 5 different systems, and when you see all those various dialog boxes on your screen when you hit print, what you're actually seeing is different dialogues from different systems.
Right.
One of them wants to know this, and one of them wants to know that. And wouldn't it be great if we could get, Epson, Apple, Microsoft, Adobe, all to sit down in a room, and we tell them, you don't go to lunch until you solve this.
Right. Right.
Right. Even if that's a year. You don't go to lunch.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be great. I mean, the other way is, of course, to go through a RIP like image print, which gets rid of a lot of those headaches once you have it set up, which is not that big a deal. But then you have to get your files out of your application and get into image print and then go from there. But it does, and then Mark Dubovoy recently argued, I think on one of our shows even, that optimizing the ink output, the ink levels on your printer, and then creating your own profiles so you get the best possible output on your printer, and then having all these to deal with all these dialogues to optimize, you get the same or better image quality if you go into image print, choose the paper profile that's made for you already, and have already everything optimized right there. So
yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I've been using image print for many, many years. I like it. But I'll tell you frankly, I did some printing this past weekend where I printed some very difficult images. And I printed them with Image Print 8, and I printed them out of Lightroom. And I think it's a quibble as to which one is better. Mm-hmm. And I think what that is a testament to is that Epson has done such an incredible job over the last 4 or 5 years improving their printer drivers.
Right.
Now, what I will say is if you're the kind of person that likes to use lots of different papers and, experiment, and sometimes you're printing on canvas and sometimes on rag and sometimes on burrito, image print is fabulous because they have profiles, beautiful, high-quality profiles that they make.
For pretty much everything, right?
Everything. Yeah. Every paper you can imagine. And if a new paper comes out, they'll make it as soon as they can get their hands on some of the paper. And they have a daylight version of the profile, a tungsten version of the profile, a mixed daylight and tungsten, a fluorescent. I mean, that's where
the angel starts dancing again on the pin of the head, right?
Well, yeah, no, they do. You're quite right. Except, let's say, for example, that you're selling your work, fine art photography, and let's say you're selling it, and you know that these large display fine art prints are going to be hung in an atrium, where they're going to be in daylight, predominantly.
Right.
If you print with a daylight-specific profile, they're just going to be that much better.
Right.
And if you make a print that's going to be hung in someone's living room and it's going to have a tungsten halogen light shining on it and will rarely get any direct sunlight, then the tungsten profile is probably going to be better.
Or an office with the fluorescent light, which is massively different, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So there are a lot of things to be said in favor of using image print, and it used to be that their dithering, the way they lay down the dots, used to be far superior to what Epson does, and I have to say that I don't think that advantage is as great anymore.
Right.
But if you're a commercial printer, let's say you're a wedding photographer or a school photographer, and you're doing picture packages, where you need 1 8x10 and 2 5x7s, and blah 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 blah.
Right.
Again, page layout is really cool, and you can save the layouts.
Right.
And so someone calls you up 2 weeks later and says, "Oh yeah, could I have another order?"
Right.
It's a matter of just simply going click.
Yeah. No, it's a very good product, that's for sure. Great, fantastic. So, Michael, we are already over time again, as we usually are, and I can let you off the hook and go for a beer. Thank you very much for joining us today. Of course, we'll have the episode produced pretty soon, and we'll let you know if people want to download it. Again, thanks for your time, and hopefully on again soon. And I look forward to the next parts of From Camera to Print and Screen, Michael Reichman's and Jeff Sheary's new tutorial on the luminous landscape. That was our topic of the day, and thank you for watching today everywhere in the world on the luminouslandscape.com. We have our stream live there, or on our website at smibs.tv. And of course, thank you to our sponsors at ThinkTel and at Web Collapse for supporting our show. This was episode number 20 of Photo Espresso, and see you soon again.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank
Hi
you,
to
Michael.
Christy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.